Vladimir Guerrero Jr. had an underwhelming season in home runs, and George Springer had a complete overachieving year that is completely bonkers. How are we approaching them in 2026 draft season?
You are Locked On Fantasy Baseball, your daily fantasy baseball podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, fantasy baseball fanatics, and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Baseball podcast, brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network. As always, we are the number one source of fantasy baseball knowledge, and thank you for joining us and making us your first listen each and every day. My name is Matthew Ane, and I'm going to be your host today. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure to hit the bell below to subscribe you to the channel and give you a notification every time we drop a new episode. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, wherever you're getting that audio, make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a 5-star rating, and review. It really helps out the show. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Download the app today. Now, look, we got some questions here for 2026. How do we handle these players? Right? Like, we have a ridiculous season from George Springer, who I can't believe we even saw this kind of season from him. I really was out on him so wholeheartedly. We have Vladimir Guerrero Jr. not taking a step forward in the power category, but a step back. We have Bichette just having a monster year and just honestly not seeing that coming. And then you have Shane Bieber too, who now is on the Blue Jays and honestly looking like a mighty stud. So we'll see how we're going to approach them come 2026. That's what we're here to talk about. So let's open up with Vlad, guy that's, ultimately been drafted in going to be drafted in, probably end of the first, beginning of the second. And, essentially how am I going to grade him and evaluate him to kind of manage draft expectations, get my return on draft pick, which is ROP. You're going to hear me say that a lot throughout the show. And how do we capitalize on to make sure that we're not reaching or getting things, paying too much, right? And, that's what you come here for, essentially. So Flesh with 23 home runs, the only disappointing season. Obviously, you draft Vladimir Jr. for I'm going to get 30 some odd home runs, 30 to 35, even 40. Because we all know he has that upside. He did it, once in 2021 where he had 48 home runs. But other than that, it's really been 32, 26, 30, and 23 now. It's like all over the place. But I could say this about Vladimir Guerrero Jr. The ceiling is always high. He makes amazing contact with the ball. He barrels literally 12.2%, which is elite, mixed with 50% hard contact percentage. Like, when you're making hard contact 50% of the time, along with barreling 12.2% of the time, you're going to hit the ball out of the park. And that's what he did this year. And unfortunately, I think he just got a little unlucky that it was just, only managed with 23. You could put this on any other season and he hits 40. Like, there's no real difference. Like, we can look at that. What was that season again? The 2021 season and what he was doing in terms of barreling. And it was only 2.5% better. So ultimately, like, everything else is pretty much the same that he was doing in that amazing career year. And why can't he repeat that? There's nothing that stops him. Well, obviously, we know his ceiling and we know what he's capable of. The batting average is truly the best part. What I love about Vlad. If he just hits me 30 and gets the batting average, I'm incredibly happy. But, the power upside is great. He's the first baseman that I would I'd comp to like pretty much like Nolan Arenado, a guy that crushed the ball a lot and just, ended up with like 35 home runs, batted near 300 and just did his thing every single year. And he just returned on first round value every single year, and everything Vladimir Guerrero Jr. does to get his batting average to the way it is completely repeatable. Strikeout percentage at 13.8%. He's a guy that is good at not striking out. And then he walked 11.9%. You mix those two together, and it's not like that batting average is hollow. Like, it is completely real. Not like he struck out 27% of the time and only walked 6, but still managed to post it. Where that would draw some questions of, are we going to see some negative regression? No, I think this is consistent and here to stay as long as his plate discipline sticks around. He doesn't really chase. He chased only 21.4% of the time. And you mix that with only whiffing 21.5% of the time. All things that lead up to great batting average. Now, the team as a whole, I think, is pretty good, and hence why we saw a good amount of runs and ribs from him. So Vladimir Guerrero Jr. ultimately is I would say a end of the first, beginning of the second pick, no question. Honestly, it just depends on your draft philosophy and where the draft takes you and what pick you have. But I'm definitely not drafting him in the upper echelons of the draft because you're drafting him at his ceiling. But I definitely wouldn't hesitate towards the lower end of the draft around like 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. And then in the second round, it's just a matter of how you approach the draft, who you use your target. But Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is going to be a consistent source of consistency all season long. Let's move on. So about George Springer, the guy that completely blindsided half the league. He was not on my bingo card in terms of production this year. You look at what he did and you're just like, okay, is this George Springer from like 2018? Because the last time or not even 2018, 2019, where like we saw this kind of production from him when he played a full season, it's insane. He finished with 32 home runs, had batted 309, even had 18 stolen bases, which is the second highest in his career in stolen bases, which is bonkers. Had a good amount of runs and ribs. I mean, he's on a better team now. I mean, he's been on the Toronto for quite some time, and finally, the team as a whole is better now, and hence why they made it as far as they did. But that explains the runs and ribs. But the power, the average, those are things that have not been there. Like quite honestly, this is a career year for batting average for George Springer. This is one of his higher home run season totals in a career. His next highest after his career high at 39 is 34, and then it's 32 at his age 35 season. Am I really buying into this? The underlying stats are a mixed bag. And that's the thing, right? He barreled intensely this year and made amazing contact and coupled it with hard hit percentage of 47.6%. That is actually absolutely bonkers numbers that you kind of say, okay, it's kind of sustainable, it's real. But the thing is, right, like he's not a guy that's been doing those kind of, stats under the in a long time. Like, quite honestly, you go back and it's just like, last time George Springer hit 30 plus home runs, right, was 2019. Last time he even came close was 2025, and that was in 2022. And you look at 2022, even for that, and the barrel percentage was at 8.4%. I don't see this kind of positive regression being sustainable for George Springer. He had an electric season, is going to be was a great asset to help you get to the championship in a lot of leagues, but he was not a guy you thought you were going to count on to the season. And I think if his draft price gets out of control in 2026, he's going to be a flat out bust across the whole board. You're going to count on a 36-year-old to repeat um, one of his best seasons in his career. To repeat that? Absolutely not. I'm sorry. I can't get on board for that, and I can't tell you to do that. So for me, that's a hard pass. He's going to be a bust in 2026 because I don't think it's sustainable. Let's move on. Let's talk about Bo Bichette. Bo Bichette in a contract year, having a really good year. Had a really good year, actually. Season's over. Now, it's not the 2020, one season where he had 29 home runs and had 25 stolen bases. We're nowhere near that, but this is a really good year for Bo. Bo had 44 doubles this season, along with 18 home runs and 94 ribs, and batted 311. The batting average just went away for 1 year. He's always been a product of batting average, and I like that about him. But the power is still not there. I think those days are over. The ribbies and the runs can be explained by the improvements of the team and just how well they did. But the doubles numbers are monstrous. It makes him very valuable for points leagues. And in leagues where you have the doubles category. But in standard 5x5 roto leagues, you play in NFB NF sorry, you know what I'm trying to say. Those kind of leagues, twist, my brain's not all here right now, I guess. But NFBC, there we go, drafts. Those are the categories where it goes, those are the leagues where Bo isn't really as relevant. Ultimately, yeah, you're going to get good batting average, but you're not going to get an exorbitant amount of stolen bases. You're not going to get an exorbitant amount of home runs. You're not going to get a lot of runs in general. And the ribs, I mean, they're great and all, but is this team going to be as good as they are? Where is he going to land? Because he's a free agent this year. So, that's the other question too. If he's on this team if he's not on this team next year, how well is he going to do? Where does he land? And that's also going to draw a lot of questions. So right now, he's going to be, regardless, I think, outside of my top 12 at the position at shortstop. But You know, he can start creeping up closer to it depending on the landing spot, but and depending on the deal he signs. Those are the two things that are going to drive how I focus. If he gets a long-term deal, I'm probably going to avoid him and put him back where I normally would have him at 17 or 18. But if he gets like a 1-year deal and it's a prove it deal to try and do what everybody else has been doing, Bichette is going to be interesting. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Anthony Santander and his bust of a season, and so much more coming up right after this. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel is getting you ready for kickoff every Sunday with can't miss offer. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. I love using FanDuel because it fits however I like to bet. Player props, building same game parlays, or even jumping in live as the action unfolds. It makes every game more exciting, whether you're watching your team or just keeping an eye on your fantasy lineup. It's quick, it's easy, and it's the best way to add a little bit more energy to Sundays. So, are you ready to play? Download the FanDuel app today by visiting fanduel.com to get started. That's fanduel.com to place your first $5 bet. And look, there's a lot of good games for the NFL this week. We have some good ones. CMC is projected in fantasy to put up 21 points. So, why not bet the over? And I'll do this for you. I'm going to bet the over in expected runs. I'm going to bet the anytime touchdown, and I'm going to do receptions over 4, along with over 40 receiving yards, and in the same game parlay with the same player, and I'm sure it's going to hit. So, FanDuel. Let's get back into it and talk about Anthony Santander. Now, Anthony Santander, not only did he follow into the new year, new team kind of type vibe, but also was hurt a good chunk of the season. And, how do we quantify what was injury and what was just the uncomfortableness of being on a new team? Well, here's what I'm here to tell you. Well, let's read off the stats and kind of break it down from there. 194 at bats, 16 runs, 5 doubles, 6 bombs, 18 ribs, batted 175. Not pretty. Not pretty at all. The only really good thing in the bright spot of his whole season was he walked 11.3%. That is actually good. That is something that we've seen him, be good at. He's usually like a career 8.5 guy over the last couple of years. But, to see the improvement, at least in that, hey, if I'm not doing things well behind the plate, at least I can essentially get on base, right? And that you can kind of live with. But, how am I approaching him in 2026? Well, I think I think we can kind of give him a pass. I mean, granted, I think he's going to come at a discount. I don't think I'm going to rank him as a top 36 outfielder, probably in more like the 37 to 48 range. But, ultimately, like that's a steal. I think he's going to be a target for me in a lot of places because I'm going to take that shot. Him as my 4th OF is going to be stellar. And that is the part where I'm going to be excited to have him on my team. There is in the past, I have compared him to Kyle Schwarber light. That is literally what I've called him. Man batting average going to hit about 250. Like that is something that he does. He is a career 241 hitter. So you can see anywhere from 240 to 257, which is, great in a really good year, like where he's done it twice, 261, which I think that's a little stretch. But power is the key. 44 home runs in 24, 28 and 23, 33 and 22. He has power. He does hit the ball hard. He definitely, doesn't underwhelm in the categories where I say he definitely can't do it because the guy last in 2024 barreled the ball 11.7% and had a hard contact percentage of 41.6. Obviously, I'd like to see that a little bit better, the hard hit percentage, but at least the barreling and the quality contact was way more often. You look at 2023, he had barrel percentage and a hard contact percentage of 46%. So like he's hit for power and it's you've seen it in his batting profile of being consistent. So yeah, I don't think that's just magically going to go away. And therefore, I also think with the injury, the performance, and just people just looking at stat sheets sometimes is going to overlook Anthony Santander. And for me, I'm going to want to go ahead and draft him as a sleeper. I think, and sometimes a sleeper isn't always like, oh my God, he's like the end of the draft gem. No, he's a sleeper because he's being drafted well below what he probably would be if we could tell you what that outcome is going to be. And I think that he's going to overachieve an over draft price, right? So the return on the draft pick, the ROP, is just significantly better with Anthony Santander on your team, in all honesty. And I think that he's going to come at a good discount. Now, ADP is going to decide, and me talking about him probably all offseason is going to drive up. But I think Anthony Santander is going to be a guy we're going to be targeting all off season long. So let's keep an eye on him and see how he makes through his progressions. But let's switch over. Let's talk about some pitching. Let's talk about Shane Bieber. Obviously getting traded over from the Guardians to the Blue Jays, and ultimately, I think it was a good move. I think obviously he got to go as deep as he did in the playoffs, which is wonderful. Especially just finally getting off that team. I think honestly he probably would have got traded last year if he didn't go down to Tommy Johns, and he was, you know, in that limited outings he looked stellar. But anyway, I digress. This season, even though he was coming off Tommy John, he still looked good. 40 innings, 37 strikeouts, a 3.57 ERA, a whip of 101, like stellar. I am ignoring the FIP. I'm ignoring the expected ERA because I've seen this movie before, and I know that Shane Bieber is an amazing pitcher. And I'm gonna just discount it and say, okay, cool. Maybe he did get lucky a little bit this year. Maybe this is just the unfortunateness of coming off it. But let's look at, like, for instance, just let's look at the playoffs. Like, let's see what he did in the playoffs and talk about, like, okay, well, there's an easy way to settle this. We saw more than 40 innings. We saw also all the playoffs. We saw him go pretty deep into the postseason. So let's talk about it, right? So in 2025, he had quite a few games. And yeah, he got lit up a little bit in against the Yankees and Seattle again, but when it mattered against the Dodgers, a 3.57 ERA, 3.86 ERA in the second start. Now, not as good, but still. And look, it's all about control coming back. The last thing they come back when you come back from Tommy John is control. But we're seeing good outings. We're seeing good things. Even in those games where he got blown up, his FIP, fielding independent pitching. So if you had an average defense behind you, what would your ERA actually be, right? So in that game where he posted a 6.75 ERA against the Yankees, he really had a FIP of 276. Against the Seattle Mariners, 3.02 ERA when he posted a 4.15. Same thing again, a 3.30, a 4.38 ERA with a 3.54 FIP. So, some of it's unluckiness. Some of it is, just trying to get control back and getting the feel for your grips and your pitches and your releases after not pitching for a year and a half. And he still pitched great, in my opinion. And I think ultimately, we're going to see some serious positive regression in 2026. And, I'm going to probably have him ranked as probably a top 24, SP. I think that's fair to say. And, if the draft price is lower, I'm going to be smiling ear to ear. I'm going to be painting myself the like Joker face over here, saying, "You're going to let me get him because why would you? Because he's so good. You sometimes people just look at stat sheets and just say write him off, and that's not cool. There's more to it. Let's move on. Let's talk about Kevin Gausman, another guy that had a resurgence year, but was not consistent this year. I will say that Gausman, uh, you know, posted season-ending numbers were pretty good. A 3.59 ERA, 100 through 193 innings with 189 strikeouts with a whip of 106. Stellar. But he was not the picture of consistency whatsoever. You look at what he did in April, he looked monstrous. Then May, he had a 30. He had a here we go. Sorry, I was reading the wrong one. So in April, he had a 4.50 ERA, then looked stellar in May, got lit up in June for 5.46, awesome in July, awesome in August, and then September. He ended the season on a strong note, but he also got hammered 2 months out of the year. Now, I'm not expecting a guy to have, sub 3 ERAs the whole season, but what I expect is at least threes for a guy that, like, I think is probably going to get overdrafted in a lot of leagues. I think people see the name and see how good he's been for the last couple of years and going to end up overpaying essentially. And I'm not going to be on that bandwagon. I think he's a top 36-ish fringe 36, probably like the 36 pitcher, and then probably more into the 37 to 48 kind of category for me. And I might be the only one on this island, but I'm sorry. You look at Kevin Gausman over the last couple of years, and he's been good. He's been good, but not Gausman-esque. And specifically, going into age 35, I love pitchers as they get older. I don't. I'm going to trust him, but hey, to each his own. I'm not really feeling it. You know, didn't get enough ground balls, gave up a lot of hard contact, gave up quality contact. The only thing he did well this year was strike out and walk guys, which usually is a good indicator of, being consistent, being able to repeat, and being able to keep up certain things in ERAs. But it's also a combination of, hey, Gausman can also just get exploded at any point in time and just give up a whole bunch of runs and just take your week. So Gausman, for me, I'm out. If he's going in the top 36 at this point. But coming up next, I got a couple more pitchers for you. I got guys like Jose Berrios, Chris Bassett, and Jeff Hoffman. And how am I handling them in 2026? The NFL season is back, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium surrounded by fans cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets, that can be a hassle between queues, login screens, prices jumping up at checkout. It's just frustrating. That's why I use Game Time. The app gives you the advantage back to the fans. Game Time is a fast, easy, and backed by Game Time's guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best prices. Plus, all fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. I honestly buy all my tickets with Game Time. Been using it way before I worked for Locked On. It's just one of those applications that I just can't not use. I always make out better than I do on any other ticketing site. That's just me. So download the Game Time app today. Create an account and use the code Locked On MLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that promo code is LOCKEDON MLB for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go and download Game Time today. And all right, let's get back into it and finish out this show. Let's talk about Mr. Jose Berrios. Now, Berrios, beginning of the season, he looked great. So great. You're saying it like Tony the Tiger. But, you look at it and you're just like, he's okay. And Dom and I were saying, it's time to trade. Trade him, sell high, just get get what you can for him, because we saw this kind of happening. 4.17 ERA finish through 166 innings with 138 strikeouts. And then you mix in a 1.30 whip. Not the greatest season. And, he only missed 2 starts. So, I mean, it's one of those things where I look at his season as a whole. I look at the FIP, which is sitting at 4.65, and I just go, I'm not really buying into the year. And then you look at a couple other things. The expected ERA is worse than the FIP. It's a 4.83. So everything Dom and I were seeing was just, obviously not going to be sustainable how he started off the season to how he ended. And honestly, too, we were also calling him a bust going into the season because we don't think he's talented anymore. Like, look, he doesn't have a knock your socks off fastball. It's only a 92.5 miles per hour. He doesn't walk guys and strike guys out at a high rate in strikeouts and low rate in the walk percentage to make things sustainable and keep that ERA down and get himself out of trouble. He's not a ground ball pitcher because he's only doing about 42.3%. And he gives up quality contact because guys barrel against him 11.3% of the time this year specifically. And that's good, especially when you couple it with hitting hard hit percentage of 42.5%. Like, these are all things that scream, any given moment, Jose Berrios can blow up your weekly ERA, which then why would you want him on your team? Now, if he's like my SP7, sure, I will take a shot because then I have no strings attached. I could drop him, feel not guilty whatsoever about it. But, if you're even thinking about getting in the realms of top, SP5-ish, don't do it to yourself. Do not do it. Jose Berrios is not worth it. He is going to crush you all season long. So just peace out on Jose Berrios. Do not draft. Let's move on. Let's talk about Chris Bassett. Another guy, free agent, I might add. Going to be on a different team next year. And, interesting enough, but had a good season, and by a good season being that he was a great ERA, I have a great waiver wire pickup that I didn't really draft, and deeper leagues was the only place he did, and he panned out for you. When he was good, and when he's bad, he was bad. Let's put it that way. 170 innings pitched, 166 strikeouts, a 3.96 ERA, and a 1.327 whip. Not the worst, not the best. FIP is kind of right on par, and it is what it is. Now you look at just how he did over the season, and you just look at his ERA, and he had a lot of good and some bad. April was awesome. He was pretty rough in May, June, July. July not as bad, but then he finished out the season strong. August was a 3.67 ERA. September was a 2.6 ERA. He really did have a good season overall, especially later in the year, which you picked him up in April, you hadn't, or you drafted him, you were feeling great. May, you were like, and then you started sitting him, and then you eventually dropped. Then after the All-Star break, you probably just picked him back up because he started looking good again, just like Dom and I recommended. And then you roll to the end of the season because he was so good at the end of the day. Now, how are we handling him for 2026, the 36-year-old? Well, that's the thing. I don't think I want to draft him again. I don't think he's on my draft board as a guy I'm going to draft. In deeper leagues, yes, I will play with that. I will definitely probably end up looking at him on my draft board and saying, okay, we're in the later rounds, then we can talk about him. But you look at why his ERA was the way it is and why those months were bad is because he allows quality contact. He allows hard contact. He doesn't strike guys out enough, but he does do some good things. Hence why we saw good performances. He does, even though he gives up quality contact, the hard hit percentage is only 36.6% at the time. So it's one of those things where I can kind of see a way that it can counterbalance itself. He also produces ground balls 46.1% of the time. But again, he's not a guy that I'm going to be targeting, earlier in drafts, or I'm going to be like, oh, okay, he's going to be one of my, first 7 pitchers. No, 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 no. Like 8th, 9th, 10th pitchers, depending on how deep your benches are, how you approach drafting. Personally, you think about it, right? You got 2 SPs, you got 4 pitcher categories, you get 6. Then, even if you have 5 bench, I usually carry about three pitchers on my bench. That's just my draft philosophy and how I roster players. You know, you're gonna he was the 9th pitcher is where I kind of start considering him, or 8th pitcher. Like that is the range. He gets into my 7th as my first bench pitcher. I'm not touching him with a 10-foot pole. But 7th, 8th, 9th, that is where I'm really at, where I'll be like, okay, Chris Bassett. In deeper leagues, where, you're in a 15 or higher, that is where, like, okay, cool. Like, he might move up to the 6th. But, because there's less draft pool. But, you know, shallow leagues like 12 and under, don't even touch him unless he's like one of your last picks of the draft. He's not going to be the value that you think he's going to be. Let's move on. Let's talk about a guy that could possibly be the number 3 closer in all baseball next year. That's Jeff Hoffman. Had a great year. Quite honestly, it was lights out. Very impressed. Coming over from the Phillies, I think with a grudge, just crushed it for him. Was never really the closer over in Philadelphia. They always just managed to roll out like Alvarez and the chicken wing and everybody else. Never really gave Hoffman a shot, which they should have, even though they ended up getting Duran this year. They didn't need to, because they had Hoffman. And Hoffman had a great year, even though the ERA was at a 4.37. He still had a great year, 33 saves through 68 innings and 84 strikeouts and a 119 whip. Now, yeah, the ERA is a little bit higher, and I think that'll come back to norm. We've seen him have several years with sub-3 ERAs. And, these things happen, especially new year, new team. And if that's the only negative regression we got out of him switching, I'm not mad at this. Look, when I look at closers as a whole, just from a perspective of how I analyze somebody being valuable as a closer, I look at guys that are going to have high strikeout numbers and that are going to get a lot of saves. And then, yeah, their ERA matters, obviously, and that kind of gets scaled into where they get ranked. But ultimately, like, I think that we're going to see positive regression in those regards, because you look at under the hood, and he's pretty good. Now, there's some improvements needed. We'll talk about it, right? So the barreling is the biggest thing. He gives up quality contact, 12.8%. That needs to come down to, where we saw him, which we've seen him do in, 2024, literally last year on the Phillies, a 7.6%. That's a lot better number. Not great, but better. Now, the hard hit percentage, that is actually really good, 39.5%. Now, it's not super elite, but it's enough. Now, he also needs to evolve his ground ball percentage and produce more ground balls, but it's right there on the cusp of where I'm okay with it at 40.7. Another 2%. I'm nitpicking at this point, but hey, we're talking about the top end guys, right? So this is the conversation. Where does Jeff Hoffman fall? Top 5 without a doubt, possibly top 3, especially with Class A's issues. He's probably not going to pitch this year or ever again. In all honesty, he's being indicted. So, these are the key things. but things that make it repeatable, right? Struck out guys 29.3% of the time, even with the walking, being at 9.4%. It's just a smaller sample size, really making that hyperinflated. 4 or 5 less, and you're seeing a better walk percentage. So I'm going to give him a pass on that. Gets guys to whiff 31.6% of the time, gets guys to chase 35.1% of the time. And his fastball is at 96.5 miles per hour. He's stellar in those regards. Plus, even the high ERA he posted at a 4.37, the expected ERA was actually a 3.82. Look, everything about Hoffman screams there's going to be positive regression in ERA. It's going to scream top 5 potential, and if not top 3 ceiling. And Jeff Hoffman is going to be a valuable, valuable closer going into 2026. Guy we're not going to want to miss out at all, because the Blue Jays are going to be back to compete again, along with Jeff Hoffman just being as stellar as he normally is. But that's it for today, guys. So thank you so much for joining me. And please like, subscribe, comment, rate, review, do everything you can to share the show, because I truly love bringing it to you each and every day. And thank you for making Locked On Fantasy Baseball your first listen each and every day. For your second listen, check out the all-new Locked On MLB Game Night, every game, every night, all season long. Get your local analysis on a national scale. Find MLB Game Night on Locked On MLB YouTube or wherever you're listening to your podcast. Peace out.